The room looked beautiful from the outside. Soft lights floated above, making the silver walls glow like stars. Expensive silk curtains hung from tall glass windows. There were golden pillows on the floor and sweet scents in the air, but for Mira, this place was not beautiful. It was her cage, her prison, her nightmare. She sat quietly on the wide bed. The sheets were soft, like clouds, but she felt no comfort. Her wrists were sore. Bruised under the fake golden bracelets, no one saw the pain behind her calm face. She had learned not to cry, not to scream. Only silence kept her alive. The Keltar lords had taken her many moons ago. Their ships landed near her village and burned everything. Her parents were killed. Her sister vanished. She was too young to fight, too weak to run, so they took her, dressed her in fine clothes, and gave her a name she hated: bed warmer. Her job was to smile, to stay quiet, and to obey. Every night, someone came to her room, alien warriors with cold hands and cruel eyes. She never knew their names, only their weight and the smell of fear. Sometimes they spoke in harsh voices. Sometimes they laughed, but they never asked if she wanted to be there tonight. She was told a new visitor was coming. Not a Keltari, not a noble, but a human. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. They were known for being strange, stubborn, and unpredictable. Some were kind, but most were cruel in different ways. Mira sat still, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for pain. The door opened with a hiss, and she didn't look up. Footsteps entered, heavy but slow. She waited for the usual command: take off your dress. But it didn't come. Instead, a voice spoke softly, almost like a whisper. "You're cold," he said, and she looked up in surprise. The man standing before her was not like the others. He had short dark hair, a beard touched with gray. His eyes were tired but gentle, full of sadness she didn't understand. He wore a long brown coat and gloves. He looked more like a traveler than a soldier. Mira didn't move, confused by his stillness. Then he walked to a chair and sat down. Far from the bed, he removed his gloves slowly, looked around the room, and then said, "I won't hurt you." She blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. No one ever said that before. He took out a small bag from his coat and pulled out a thick blanket. Then, he stood and gently placed it at the foot of the bed. "For you," he said, "in case you're cold." Then he turned, walked to the wall, and sat on the floor, facing away from her. Like he didn't want to see her cry. Mira didn't trust him. Not yet. Maybe this was a new game. A trick to make her lower her guard. She stayed on the bed, wrapped herself in the blanket, and waited. Minutes passed, maybe hours. But he didn't move, didn't speak again. Her body relaxed slowly, her eyes heavy. She looked at the man again. He was already asleep on the floor. Why? Why didn't he touch her? Why did he bring a blanket? Tears fell down her cheeks quietly, and for the first time in many nights, she whispered one word to herself: hope. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window. Mira opened her eyes and saw the man still sleeping on the floor. He looked peaceful, but also broken in some way. She stepped off the bed slowly, afraid her chains would jingle. But there were no chains, no cuffs, no guards. She could walk, she could move freely. He woke up when she stepped near him. His voice was soft. "Did you sleep well?" She didn't answer, only nodded. He reached into his coat and gave her a small piece of bread. "Eat," he said. "No one should go hungry." She took the bread with shaky hands. Her stomach hurt from hunger, but also from the strange feeling. Inside kindness, she had forgotten what it felt like. She didn't even know his name, and yet, This human, this stranger, had shown her more care in one night than the Keltari had in years. As he stood up and stretched, he looked at her and said, "My name is Elias." She didn't speak, just stared at him. He didn't ask for her name, didn't demand anything. He just opened the door and said, "You can come if you want." Then he walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Myra stood there. Heart pounding. Freedom was just one step away, but was it real? She wrapped the blanket tighter around her and took a small step forward. And then another. For the first time in years, she walked toward something that wasn't fear. She walked toward a future that hadn't been written yet. Asterisk, the stars outside. The guest room blinked slowly as the alien sky turned soft purple. Mira sat near the window, a cup of warm broth in her hands. She didn't drink it yet, just watched the light move across the glass. The room was quiet. Too quiet. She kept waiting for the sounds. She hated the footsteps. The command, the cold voice calling her property. But they didn't come. Instead, Elias sat on the far side of the room, fixing a small device in his hands. His coat hung on a chair, and a thin scarf wrapped around his neck. He didn't look at her, didn't say anything strange. It was the second day, and he hadn't touched her once. He hadn't even crossed the invisible line she had drawn between them in her mind. Mira didn't understand why buy someone like her if he didn't want to use her. Keltar lords always demanded, always took, but this human. He had done nothing except offer her food, a blanket, and rest. She watched him quietly, waiting for the moment the mask would fall, for the trick, the trap, the punishment. Elias glanced up and met her eyes. "You should eat," he said. "You're safe here." She lowered her head, not knowing what to say. Safe. That word felt strange in her ears, like an old dream she forgot long ago. She took a small sip of the broth. Was real. Warm and calming. She didn't know the taste. But it made her chest hurt. Not because it was bad, but because it was good. Tears threatened to rise, but she wiped them away quickly. Later that evening, Myra walked into the small washroom behind the bedchamber. There was a mirror, but she avoided her reflection. She didn't want to see the marks on her neck, the empty look in her eyes. Instead, she washed her face slowly, as if scrubbing away old memories when she came out. Elias had prepared a soft floor bed for himself again. "You can have the bed," he said. "I'll be fine down here." She didn't move, just stared at him, confused. He noticed her silence, and added, "You don't owe me anything, Mira." Her name on his lips felt strange soft. Not like a curse, like he meant it. Not like the guards who barked it at her. That night, she didn't sleep much, not because of fear, but because her mind wouldn't stop asking questions. Who was this man? Why was he here? What did he want from her, if not her body? No one ever helped her without wanting something back. In the early hours, while the moons crossed paths in the sky, Myra sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "Why didn't you touch me?" Elias, half asleep, opened his eyes and replied softly, "Because you looked like someone who had been touched too much." His words hit her chest like a stone. He turned over and fell back asleep, leaving her staring into the dark. The next day, Elias took her outside. It wasn't far, just a private garden behind the guest house. There were tall yellow trees with soft leaves and blue flowers blooming in quiet corners. She walked slowly, bare feet on the smooth path. Sunlight warmed her skin, and the air smelled like peace. Elias sat on a low bench and waited, giving her space. After a few moments, she turned to him and asked, "Why did you buy me?" He looked up, surprised, then answered gently, "To keep you from worse hands." She didn't speak, but her eyes filled with tears. I was once taken to, Elias said, his voice low. During the border wars, the Keltari caught me, beat me, sold me. He showed her a long scar across his left arm. I escaped, but not alone. Someone risked everything to help me. He looked at her with quiet strength. So now, I'm doing the same. Mira sat beside him, the silence heavy, but soft. She wanted to believe him, but part of her still trembled inside. He didn't reach out, didn't touch her hand. He just sat there with her, letting her be. Later, they returned inside, and she helped him cook a simple meal she didn't know the tools, but he showed her, step by step. They didn't speak much, but she noticed how he smiled when she added spice. For the first time, she laughed a soft, unsure laugh. Elias looked up in surprise, then smiled back. You have a nice laugh, he said. She blushed, hiding her face. That night, she slept without fear. In her dreams, she wasn't a slave. She was running through tall grass, her feet light, the sky above her open. No chains, no collars, no voices calling her names. Only the wind, the stars, and the echo of someone saying, "You're safe now." When she woke up, Elias was in the kitchen, making tea. She walked toward him slowly and said something she hadn't said in years. "Good morning," he smiled without turning. "Good morning, Myra." And in that small moment, something changed. Not the world, not the stars, but her. A piece of her broken soul had taken its first step back into the light. The next morning, Mira stood in the hallway with bare feet, staring at the door. It wasn't locked. There was no guard standing outside with a laser staff. No scanners watching her every move. The door to the garden was open, and for the first time in years, freedom was not a dream, was real and waiting. But she didn't run. Her legs could move, but her mind still wore chains. What if this was a test? What if he was watching, waiting to punish her for stepping beyond her place? So she stayed, still as stone, her hand trembling near the doorframe. Elias walked in carrying fresh fruit, his coat dusty from a morning walk. He looked at her, then, at the open door. "You can go outside," he said gently. "You can go anywhere." Myra looked away, ashamed that her body refused to believe him. He didn't press her, didn't ask questions. He just set the fruit on the table and walked into the kitchen. Later, when he brought her a plate of food, she whispered, "Why is there no lock?" Elias sat down across from her, calm and kind. "Because locks are for prisoners," he said. "And you are not one anymore." She wanted to believe him, but the fear inside her had deep roots. She had lived too long in dark rooms with smiling monsters. That evening, Elias gave her a datapad. "This has language lessons," he explained. "I noticed you struggle with some words." Mira hesitated, then took it. He didn't say she had to learn. He offered it like a gift, not a command. That difference mattered more than he knew. In the following days, Myra started spending more time outside. She walked in the garden, sat by the small pond, and watched alien birds drink water. She listened to their chirps, so different from the cries she once heard in the slave quarters. Every sound now felt like healing. Every breath of fresh air made her feel a little less like a thing, and a little more like a person. One night, as the moons glowed softly, Elias joined her in the garden. He sat beside her on the stone bench, careful not to sit too close. "I used to have a daughter," he said suddenly, his voice rough. Myra turned her head, surprised. "She was taken during a supply raid." Elias continued, "Never found her." His hands trembled slightly. "I couldn't protect her, but maybe I can protect someone else." Mira felt something in her chest shift. She had no words, only quiet understanding. They sat together in silence, two souls broken by different wars. And in that silence, they both healed a little. The next day, a small shuttle landed near the house. Two Keltari guards stepped out with a message from Lord Varys, the one who had owned Mira. He had learned of her transfer and was demanding her return. She stood behind Elias as the guard spoke. Her hands shook. Her breath caught in her throat. But Elias didn't back down. He stepped forward, showed them a signed contract, sealed by the Galactic Trade Council. She belongs to no one, he said, his voice calm but strong. She is under my protection and under galactic law. The guards hissed in anger, but left without a fight. Still, fear lingered in Mira's eyes. What if they come back? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias nodded slowly. Then we'll be ready. He began strengthening the perimeter, reinforcing the small home with stealth tech and signal blockers. But he also taught Myra how to defend herself, basic moves. Escape drills, how to scream without fear. She practiced with focus, driven not by rage, but by the desire to never be helpless again. One night, after practice, she sat at the table and spoke without trembling. I don't want to be scared anymore. Elias looked at her with pride. Then don't be. You're not weak, Myra, he added. You're surviving, and that takes strength. She didn't cry, but her eyes were wet, not from sadness, but from something new, something like pride. She had never heard those words before. Not even from her own people. Later, she stood in front of the same door that had once frozen her in place. This time, she pushed it open without hesitation. The air outside welcomed her like an old friend. And she stepped out not like a servant, not like a victim, but like someone who was becoming whole again. Inside, Elias watched her from the window. He didn't smile, didn't cheer, he just stood there quietly, because he understood freedom is not something you give to someone. It's something they choose when they're finally ready. And tonight, Mira had chosen. The night sky above the Keltari capital was glowing red with twin moons. The city never slept, and neither did its cruelty. Beneath the polished towers and glowing signs, a hidden market thrived. A place where credits meant power. And bodies were just another price tag. Inside a dark chamber filled with velvet seats and golden lights, the auction of flesh was about to begin. Rich aliens in fine robes gathered, their eyes sharp, their laughter cold, and in the back, behind steel bars and electric chains, stood the ones being sold, silent, bruised, forgotten. Among them was Myra, her hands tied once again. Her clothes had been stripped away, replaced with a sheer robe meant to attract buyers. Her eyes burned with rage, but her body remained still. She had promised herself she would not cry, not this time. Hours before, Elias had gone into the nearest city to buy supplies. She had stepped outside for air. Not knowing spies had been watching the house, Keltari agents moved fast, striking. Like shadows, they hit her with a stun rod and dragged her into a ship before she could scream. By the time Elias returned, the garden was empty. The cup she had left was still warm, but she was gone. Now, in the auction hall, she listened to the host's voice echo across the room. This rare piece was once owned by Lord Varys himself. He announced, perfect condition, quiet. Train starting price, 8,000 credits. The crowd leaned forward, murmuring. With hunger, Myra looked down, not out of fear, but to remember Elias's face. She needed that memory to survive this one more time. The first hand rose in the air, then another, and another. The price climbed, and with every number, Mira's heart beat faster. She didn't know what would happen if she was sold again. She only knew she would not survive it twice. And then, the hall went silent. A new voice spoke from the back, calm and deep. 30,000 credits. Heads turned sharply. No one had jumped that far. All eyes focused on the figure in the back row. A man in a dark coat, covered in dust, with a scar running across his brow. It was Elias. The host blinked, confused. 30,000. Confirmed. Elias stepped forward slowly, holding up a legal scroll. Confirmed. And with full clearance from the Galactic Trade Council, he said, Mira is not a slave. She is under my legal protection. Gasps filled the room. And the host stuttered. That cannot be. She is property of Varys. Elias unfolded the scroll, revealing the council seal. Varys sold her illegally, he said, voice rising. This document makes her free. By law, the guards near the stage moved forward. Weapons drawn, Elias didn't flinch. He reached into his coat and tossed something on the floor. A small disc lit up and began recording, broadcasting everything across the sector. The audience froze. News drones from above had already picked up the feed. The entire room faces, names, numbers was now being streamed live. One of the buyers stood up and hissed, "Turn it off. That's illegal." Elias smiled coldly. So is this place. The guards hesitated, unsure. If they touched Mira now, they could be arrested. If they attacked Elias, it would be a public crime. Mira looked up, eyes wide, breath shaking. She had never seen anyone stand for her like this, not with words, not with laws. She took a small step forward, her feet still weak. Elias held out his hand. Steady and open, she didn't hesitate. She walked off the stage, past the frozen guards, past the blinking buyers, and placed her hand in his, together. They walked out of the auction hall. No one stopped them. No one dared. Outside, the night air hit her face, sharp and cold. But it was the sweetest breath she had ever taken. "I thought I'd lost you," Elias whispered, his voice rough. Myra nodded slowly. "I thought I'd lost myself." They returned to the small shuttle he had borrowed. She sat in silence as the ship lifted off, leaving the cursed city behind. Elias piloted carefully, not saying much. But his presence beside her was louder than any words. Later, when the ship reached orbit, Myra turned to him. "Why did you come?" she asked, her voice soft. He didn't look away from the stars. "Because you're not a thing," he said. "You're someone worth saving." Tears rolled down her cheeks, warm and quiet. Not from pain, but from the weight of those words. She had never believed she mattered now. Maybe she did. The stars outside the window shone brighter than ever before. And inside the ship, for the first time, Myra smiled, not for survival, but for hope. The shuttle landed on a quiet moon with silver trees and soft wind. There were no cities here, no loudspeakers, no flashing lights. Only mountains in the distance, a lake that shimmered like glass, and one small cabin made of stone and steel, resting near the edge of the forest. Elias helped Mira step off the ramp, his hand steady beneath her elbow. Her legs were still sore, but they held her weight. She looked around slowly, eyes scanning the sky, the ground, the trees. No guards, no fences, no screaming voices, only the sound of wind in the leaves. "This is my place," Elias said, setting his gear down. "No keys, no locks," he added with a gentle smile. "You can come and go as you want." Mira didn't answer, not yet. Her mind was still catching up, still whispering old fears. But her feet moved forward, not out of force, just curiosity. Inside the cabin, she saw a warm fire, 2 chairs, a long wooden table. It smelled of herbs, old paper, and something sweet, like fruit. There was a room with a bed, not a kitchen, and another with clean water and clothes. She touched the wall slowly, as if testing if it was real, then turned to Elias and asked, "Do I have to work?" He looked confused for a moment, then shook his head. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "You're free." Free. The word floated in her chest like a quiet bird. She held it gently, afraid it might fly away. Over the next few days, Mira explored the land around the cabin. She walked to the edge of the forest, stepped barefoot into the cold stream. She sat by the fire in the evenings, reading the language lessons on the datapad. Elias never hovered, never watched her too closely, but he was always there if she needed something: tea, food, or simply silence. One morning, Myra found a tiny bird lying injured near the back garden. Its wing was torn, and it chirped in pain. She picked it up carefully, wrapped it in cloth, and brought it inside. Elias watched quietly as she cleaned the wound and gave the bird water. "You have a kind heart," he said. Mira looked down, unsure how to answer. No one had ever said that to her, not even her family, not before the war. She kept caring for the bird every day, and when it finally flew again, she smiled without fear. That evening, she made soup for both of them. It was simple: roots, herbs, dried meat, but Elias ate every bite with quiet thanks. "You're a better cook than I am," he chuckled. She gave a small laugh. Her first true laugh in months. It felt strange on her lips, but good. They sat by the fire, watching the stars through the window. She turned to him and said, "When I was a girl, I dreamed of flying ships." Elias looked at her with interest. "Did you want to be a pilot?" he asked. She nodded, "But they took my name before I could learn." He didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. Instead, he stood up, walked into the back room, and returned with a small training kit. "If you still want to learn," he said, "I can teach you." Her hands shook as she took the device, not from fear, but from something new. A door had opened, not in the room, but inside her heart. Later that night, she sat alone. Holding a piece of wood she had found by the lake, she carved it slowly. With a tool Elias had given her, she shaped it into a small pendant, like a leaf with soft edges. Then, with care, she etched 2 lines in it, side by side. She wore it around her neck with a simple cord. When Elias saw it, he didn't ask what it meant. He just nodded and said, "It's beautiful." The next day, Mira helped him fix the solar panels on the roof. She asked questions, tested wires, and laughed when sparks flew. Elias showed her how to patch circuits and scan for damage. "You're quick," he said, "faster than I was at your age." And in that moment, Mira didn't feel like a rescued slave. She felt like a student, a helper, maybe even a friend. That night, as they sat outside watching the moon's rise, Mira asked softly, "Do you want me to stay?" Elias turned his head, surprised. "I want you to go where you want," he said. "But yes," he added, voice quieter now, "I'd be glad if you stayed." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't walk away either. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, looked up at the stars, and said, "This place has no walls." Elias nodded. "It doesn't need them." And in her heart, Myra finally believed it. This wasn't a cage or a hiding place. It was a home something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The days passed like gentle winds on the quiet moon. Mira had started smiling more. Speaking with confidence, she cooked new recipes from the datapad, asked Elias questions about engines, and even laughed at her own mistakes. Elias watched her change slowly, like a flower growing from burned soil. But he also knew peace never lasted long in a galaxy full of wolves. One morning, while working on the water pump near the river, Elias stopped mid-motion. A faint hum filled the sky. Low and steady. It wasn't one of their systems, it was a ship. And it wasn't friendly. He rushed back to the cabin and grabbed his old scanning unit. Myra followed, eyes wide, already sensing something was wrong. The scanner beeped sharply. A Keltar bounty ship had entered the moon's orbit. The ID code blinked red. Hunter class, Elias said under his breath, his voice calm, but his hands moved fast. They're looking for someone, he added. Looking at her, Mira's breath caught in her chest. Me? She whispered. It wasn't a question. Oh, it was the truth. The auction had been broadcast across the colonies. And someone out there still wanted her back in chains. Elias pulled an old case from under the floorboards. Inside was battle-worn armor. Scratched and dented but strong. Beside it lay a plasma pistol, a small shield generator, and a pack of thermal charges. Myra stared at the weapons, fear mixing with something else in Gar. We can run, she said quickly. Hide in the northern mountains. Elias shook his head. They'll track heat, power, movement. They'll never stop chasing you if we keep running. She looked at him, eyes sharp, voice steady. Then we fight. Elias raised an eyebrow, surprised she had once trembled at the sound of footsteps. Oh, she stood taller than ever. They worked fast, setting traps around the cabin. Mira helped. String sensor wires across the trees, set EMP mines under the soil. Elias taught her how to arm the defense turrets and reload the short-range blaster. She moved with focus, no hesitation, no fear. As the sun set behind the mountains, the sky turned deep violet. The hum returned louder, closer, the Keltari bounty. Ship landed in the valley, lights scanning the forest. 3 figures stepped out tall, armored and silent. One held a chain collar, its edges still stained red. Mira saw it from the window and clenched her fists. They think I'm still theirs, she muttered. Elias handed her a communicator and nodded. Not anymore. The traps worked fast. One stepped on a mine and was thrown backward. The other? 2 dodged and opened fire, but the turrets replied with blue light. Elias moved like he had in the war, sharp, precise, fearless. Myra stayed near the trees. Using her smaller blaster to draw attention, one of the hunters broke through and made it to the cabin wall. He kicked the door open and stormed in only to find Mira waiting. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she shot first. Aiming at the control unit on his chest, sparks flew, and the hunter collapsed with a groan. She stood over him, panting, shaking, but alive. Elias rushed in seconds later, saw the scene, and stopped. You did that? He asked. Mira nodded, still catching her breath. I'm done being afraid, she said quietly. The last Keltari wounded tried to flee to the ship, but Elias disabled the engine with a perfect shot. Smoke rose in the valley as the ship crackled. With fire, the battle was over. They dragged the 3 unconscious hunters together and activated the distress beacon. Galactic patrols would come soon, and they'd take them in. Mira looked at the burned trees and the broken armor pieces scattered across the ground. Then she looked down at her own hands. They weren't soft anymore. They were strong, steady, and no longer helpless. Back inside, Elias poured water for both of them. His shirt was torn, a bruise forming on his arm, but he was smiling. You did well, he said. Better than I ever expected. She sat beside him, tired but proud. I fought for me, she replied, not to survive, but to live. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. You're not the same girl I found in that palace? No, she said, her voice full of truth. I'm not. Later that night, the stars above looked closer. Myra stood outside, holding her wooden pendant in her hand. She whispered a promise to the wind not to be a victim again. She had lived in chains, survived cages, and escaped monsters. Now, she had fought back, and won, and in that silence, the universe seemed to answer her with light. The forest was quiet again. Smoke no longer rose from the trees, and the scars from battle were slowly being covered by wind and falling leaves. The bounty hunters had been taken by galactic patrol ships. They were now prisoners of the very laws they once ignored. And the girl they came to recapture, she was no longer afraid. Myra stood in front of the cabin, watching a bird build a nest in the tree above the roof. She had spent the last few days fixing the broken solar panels and planting seeds in the garden. Every motion she made now came with purpose. She wasn't just trying to survive, she was building something. Elias brought her a small box that morning. Inside was a tiny communicator, new, lightweight, and encrypted. "For you," he said, "in case you ever need help, or want to reach someone." Myra held the device carefully, then looked at him. I want to tell my story," she said. Elias nodded. "Then we'll find someone who'll listen." That evening, a journalist from the outer colonies arrived. She was human, young, curious, and kind. Myra had agreed to speak, but only on her terms. They sat outside, with a recording drone floating quietly between them. "My name is Myra," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I was taken from my home when I was just a child. I was sold, renamed, and used, but I'm not telling this story because I want pity," she said, eyes firm now. "I'm telling it because others like me still live in chains." The journalist asked her questions, but never pushed too hard. And for the first time, Myra shared everything, not just the pain, but the small moments of hope. The blanket from a stranger, the open door with no lock, the hands that never reached for her out of greed, the day she picked up a weapon not to hurt, but to defend her own life. When the interview was done, Myra asked for one final message to be sent out across the stars. "To anyone still trapped," she said, "you are not just property, not just skin, not just a thing. You are someone, and someday someone will see that too. And then," her voice cracked just slightly, "until then, hold on." The story spread faster than anyone expected. News hubs replayed it. Freedom networks translated it into hundreds of languages. People from all across the colonies, humans, aliens, hybrids, began to share their own stories. And slowly, a movement began. Elias watched all of this quietly, proud but distant. He never wanted credit, never asked to be named. But one day, a package arrived from the Galactic Council. Inside was a medal and a handwritten letter to the in-sheet. "Man who chose mercy over profit." It read, "You remind us of what it means to be human." Myra held the medal in her hand, then placed it inside a wooden box next to her pendant. "You earned this," she said. But Elias shook his head. "No," he replied. "You did." Weeks turned to months, and the moon bloomed with green. The cabin was no longer quiet. Myra had opened it to others, runaways, survivors, those too broken to speak. Together, they planted, built, and healed. Not with grand speeches, but with kindness, food, and space to breathe. One morning, a young alien girl arrived at the gate. Her arms were thin, her eyes hollow, and her back still carried old wounds. Myra walked out to meet her, holding a warm drink in one hand and a blanket in the other. She didn't ask the girl's name, didn't ask what she'd done or where she came from. She only said, "You're safe now." Later that night, Elias watched from the porch as the girl curled up near the fire. Myra sat beside her, humming a tune from her village, one she thought she had forgotten. She wasn't the same girl Elias had rescued from a golden prison. She was stronger now, and brighter. And maybe, just maybe, she was becoming a light for others too. Elias turned to go inside, but paused at the door. Mira looked up at him and smiled. He didn't need to say anything. She understood. The stars above them moved slowly. Planets turned, ships flew, wars came and went. But here, on this quiet moon, a new world was being born, not with weapons, but with second chances. And Mira, once sold, once silenced, once shattered, now stood tall, her head high, her hands free, her voice her own. She was not a slave. Not anymore. She was a survivor, a guide and a beacon. And, in the silence between the stars, her story echoed, not as a whisper, but as a roar.